What is the crack, everyone? It's Nathan here, aka the Rambling Kern, and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So, I was recently asked a very interesting question by one of my patrons over on Patreon. If you're looking to sponsor my work, and obviously kind of ask me any questions or you like any specific videos on any topics, I do release private videos on there. But anyway, the question was basically where did the Kerns and the Gallo class kind of fit within Gaelic structure at the time that they were most prevalent, so kind of in the 16th century. And that in itself is a fascinating question because Gaelic society at the time was rather complex and rather different to what was going on in almost anywhere else in Europe at the time. The main reason for that was primarily due to the social structure that had been ongoing in the country and also the kind of system of government that was being used at the time. Now, I'm going to use English terms for this. These wouldn't have been the appropriate terms at the time, but if you wish to kind of research these topics further, these are the ones that you'll need to use. So, the main form of government at the time was something called Tanistry, and this was basically a term used by the English at the time to kind of describe this system. And basically how this worked, in a kind of most simplistic way that I can explain it, is that a male heir, the most appropriate male heir, was the one appointed to lead a family or clan, or to become a king in the earlier cases. This didn't mean that it was a direct hereditary line, so it wouldn't mean father passes to firstborn son as you kind of expect in most modern monarchical systems. This was quite different. This was where perhaps the firstborn son is a child, and there's a older nephew or uncle who is a great warrior, so we're going to appoint him as the leader because he's the more appropriate one. As you can imagine, this system did often lead to a lot of infighting and kind of vying for power, as is the case in most of these sort of systems. On the back of that, you had this system that was referred to as gavelkind. Now, the reason for that term is because apparently it resembled something that was similar being used by the Normans in, I believe it's Kent in England at the time of the Norman conquest. And basically this was a system where land was almost in a constant flux. As a result of this, and this is kind of what I touched on with the question from my patron, was that when this happened, it resulted in, Gallo-Glass families and lineages being established in Ireland. So it wasn't just a case anymore of there just simply being mercenaries. As a result of this Tanistry system and the kind of side effects of it meant that you had people who were directly beholden to their lord. So it wasn't just a professional soldier in the modern sense, or kind of a mercenary in the sense that we think of it, where you're just hired by this person and then you leave and go to the next highest bidder. You were kind of awarded land and often belongings. So in Ireland, often the systems of payment revolved around cattle, clothing and actual items rather than specifically coin. And this is kind of noted by a number of British commentators at the time. I believe the term is oft coin does not slip the hand of the Irish, something along those lines. I'll put the quote below if I can find it. But basically, this kind of created what were essentially like private armies. You had a head of a clan or a chieftain who was then often kind of in and amongst this clan referred to as a king. You can see this with some of the O'Neills, where often they're referred to Henry O'Neill, basically the king of the O'Neills, which created these kind of very insular private armies, and that's basically what led to the Desmond Rebellion and the Tudor kind of reconquest of Ireland. For those who aren't familiar, now this is going to be a video series in its own, but basically the very quick summary was that Irish lords at the time that you had private armies. There was a dispute amongst two of them. They fought each other against the Crown's approval, and that led to basically the Crown wanting to put their foot down and stop any further incidents like this happening again. Like I said, get into a whole massive series on that, so stay tuned. But I just kind of wanted to touch on this topic of Tanistry because I think it's fascinating. I think the societal system in Ireland at the time is kind of fascinating. And to kind of touch on again what my patron was asking and kind of the long and detailed answer I had to give, as a result, warriors weren't simply a profession. Often these sort of professions were a social rank as such. And I'm going to bring up a wonderful pyramid which basically kind of explains, in a visual sense, the societal structure of Ireland at the time. You basically had like chieftains or kings. Below that you had specific ranks in society. So basically your warrior class, your poets, physicians, craftspeople. So these were all kind of the one social standing, and then below that you would had your free landholders, and then below that your churls or your serfs or your basically those who were beholden to a lord and kind of tasked to do work. So unlike in other parts of Europe where troops were just gathered up and basically as a militia force, in Ireland you had this strange kind of ebb and flow of professional soldiers who were also then kind of a family lineage, who were then also mercenaries. And as you can see, it's quite a complex and murky sort of system, but a very interesting one, and one that I do plan on doing further videos on. And this is actually going to be a video in a series on this system of governance, because I think it's quite fascinating, and some of the results of the Tudor conquest actually end up in really interesting situations that don't really get covered in Irish history, and I think are kind of really worth the look. So we do still use terms in Ireland from this system, even though we've abandoned this system. So Tanistry and Taoiseach are the two main examples, who for foreign viewers, that's basically our Prime Minister and our kind of Deputy Prime Minister. Those are the ranks that they hold, Taoiseach being our Prime Minister and Tanistry being the Deputy Prime Minister as such. These were terms used within Tanistry, and the kind of system that was based around it. Now, like I said, this led to a lot of really interesting things, and that's where next week's video is going to touch. So if you're interested in these topics, if you want to know more about them, or if you'd like to kind of chat to me directly and kind of have one-to-one videos where I can actually explain some of these topics further, please do feel free to sponsor my Patreon. I really want to do more work on there and kind of provide to my patrons and kind of get a lot more one-to-one time with them. So if you're interested in that, you'll find the description below. Stay tuned for next week's video. I'm going to dive into a really fascinating case that came about after the Tudor conquest, directly in relation to this. And if you can't do any of that, just like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help, and I really do appreciate it. So once again, thank you all very, very much for watching, and so long.